Okay, I would like to welcome everyone to our Mashpee Clean Waters Forum about financing options. We've had a lot of work by the following people who are on our subcommittee: Louise McDevitt, Beth Hennessy, Cheryl Viglione, and myself, Rosa Whiting. And we would like to welcome our guests who are going to be joining us this evening. Andrew Nelson, who has extensive experience about environmental funding. He is the liaison out of the Hyannis office for Congressman Bill Keating. And we are delighted that representatives from Mashpee's finance team are joining us. Mr. Collins, town manager, Mr. Taylor, assistant town manager, Ms. Thayer, finance director, director of assessing, Mr. Strabel, and Mr. Mahan, the treasurer. And we welcome you to join in at any time with your comments or additions to things that we're presenting, everybody who is on our panel of speakers. So we do welcome you. The first thing that we wanted to start out with talking about is that this is a very long-term plan. And Mary Adams Alexak is going to start off the discussion about this. So thanks, Mary.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to preface our conversation today with some context that this has been a journey for everybody on our committee as we've learned a lot about this challenge, the causes, the solutions. And there's one issue that's been in the background for a long time in our town, and it still hasn't been resolved. And it doesn't need to be resolved immediately, but I think it's something that we're, as a committee, going to be looking at a lot more later on. Our first priority at this point is phase one, but it's around the management structure, and it has big financial implications. Right now we're planning to do this as part of the town, and it would be through town staff and go through the normal town budget process, and that means that it will always be subject to the need for votes of all the specific items through town meeting and Proposition 2.5 when there's a debt exclusion. And that may make sense for us in the long run, but it may make sense to create a special purpose entity that is either a town or a regional district. And I think that's something we want to revisit and try to understand. And then we've all heard a lot of in the background about the role of possibly private developers. And the analogy that I use with this is that it sometimes feels really good. It sounds good to have somebody come in and take care of it, but they're going to build in a significant profit margin to do that. And so the taxpayers will end up paying at least 20% more for whatever we get. And so this is something that we're going to keep our eyes on. We don't have a specific recommendation, but I think it's a good context and for all of us as we educate ourselves to keep this in mind, that it's a big question. Who will run this and how will it be run? And over time, I think we'll learn to fill in these gaps and make some decisions on that. So I just thought I'd lay that out as context before we dive into the specifics of the phase one and the basic funding for the nitrogen management plan and the phase one. So thank you, Rosa.
Thanks, Mary. One thing that I think that the public should know is that different towns have different approaches to how they are doing their funding, and that's one of the reasons why we have done some research through all these different town funding processes, and the way that they manage their whole sewer projects and plans also is very different. To begin with, our plan was accepted in 2015. This was the plan that GHD put together for us. The total plan's figures are somewhat outdated. These need to be brought up to date because these actually were put in place before 2015, so they're at least 5 years out of date right now. But the one thing that people should take away from this slide is that the shellfish aquaculture, if it's successful, can save our community over $90 million. And that's something that we want to get started on as soon as possible, because we don't want to wait to break ground on putting in sewers systems while our bays and rivers are so dirty. Those need to be cleaned up as soon as possible. And so our phase 1 plan is going to get that going. The phase 1 plan is something that we're hopeful that will take off very soon. Let me just go back to this slide for a minute. The Cape Cod Commission did set up a structure by which all of these towns that share some of these waterways have a particular share in the cleanup process. And that's where some of these figures come from.
Okay, so the phase 1 was updated at the sewer commission meeting last week to $51.2 million.
From 34 million.
Correct.
The first two columns are, this is being presented on Monday night. The first two columns was what was presented to the selectmen from Orleans and Alan McLennan and his assumptions. The next three columns is the phase 1 hypothetical with the note 1, and that's taking what phase 1 would be and plugging in Alan McLennan's estimates for forgiveness and Cape and Islands water and betterments, and and then down at the bottom, taking the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce estimate for what they believe rooms tax, the Airbnb tax is going to bring into the town. So that was tasked to us to do specifically on what Orleans had done. Orleans, that was done by Alan McLennan, as he stated in the meeting in the Selectman's office. It was not endorsed by the Orleans finance team, and I would, or the town manager,
or the state guy.
The state guy said the state said you should assume no forgiveness, and so we were tasked to put it in the same format. We did that. We also don't endorse the debt forgiveness or the Cape and Islands forgiveness, not because it isn't going to come to fruition, but because no one knows what it's going to be. So to take those numbers is definitely a pie in the sky, we believe. So we then took phase 1, and on the fourth, the next three columns after that, we put it in what it would be currently, based on the numbers that we have currently. And you look at it, and it's basically $51.2 million if we get no debt forgiveness or reimbursement, would be $152 per year for 30 years on the average tax bill. It's going to be less than that if we get debt forgiveness and if we get rooms tax. The state, as they indicated, said you should do nothing. You should anticipate no forgiveness. You should anticipate no reimbursement. That's the safe way to say it. If we get it, great. That's the same way it was done in Orleans and Sandwich. Both of those taxpayers groups knew that, okay, we're going to vote this, but we don't know if we're going to get anything. We know what it's going to cost. We don't know what we're going to get back from the state or for forgiveness. And then the last three columns are phase 1, 2, and 3. We, as the finance team, and the town manager and assistant town manager agreed with us, we shouldn't just be showing phase 1, we should be showing some sort of money for phase 2 and 3. We threw in $50 million for each of those. Be it right or wrong, no one knows what that amount is going to be. And so if it's needed, it's going to be $450 per taxpayer. If it isn't, then it's going to be less. But at least it gives you a good idea as to what the numbers would be. For every $50 million, you're looking at $150 on the average tax bill. So that's what that...
Per year for 30 years.
For 30 years. It can be less if we have more forgiveness, if we get more room occupancy tax than anticipated. It's the feeling of the finance team. We would be very happy if we're completely wrong and Alan McLennan's numbers and estimates come to fruition. Would be great. Just we can't responsibly say that right now.
Okay, I think that we all know what you're talking about, but some people from the community who haven't been following this may not be as aware. Did you want to talk more about this slide? Or can we talk about what the state revolving funds are and the...
The state revolving fund is
okay, hold on, we got a slide on that. Okay, go ahead.
The state revolving fund is a fund that's set up in the state for towns to go to for low interest or zero interest loans, and that's what we would be using. And we qualify for 0% with our 208 plan, 208 plan, and so we can get money from the state, ask them for the money, and then we have to repay them back, and they incorporate the repayments in the bonds and do it that way, as opposed to the town of Mashpee actually going out and soliciting bonds and paying bondholders back. So it's advantageous, and the state has federal and state grants set up within their budgets to pay for the interest and take care of that. So that's what basically the state revolving fund is. It's advantageous.
Oh, it's a great deal for us, and particularly if we can get that 0% on the loan. And what taxpayers should understand is that this is money that the state gives us up front so that we can go ahead with the construction and things that need to be done. And the taxes are kind of the collateral for that for the loan, that's going to be repaying the loan over the 30 years. The room tax that he was referring to is on the next slide. This protection fund was set up ideally to reimburse at 25%, but that's not happened yet, and that's why the finance team is being conservative and saying that they can't count on that 25% funding because that hasn't happened.
Rosa, can we go back to the other slide for a minute? Thank you. I have a question about the very last bullet point, which is to adopt the land use controls, and it says Mashpee to be determined. Do we have land use controls in place?
What do you mean by land use controls?
Well, in my mind, it means limiting build out and stuff.
We already have, more than 50% of the town is already open space and protected area. There are many zoning and other things in place that allow access to building in certain areas.
So where it says to be determined, but we do qualify, we have that in place to qualify for the 0%.
I don't know what the state is looking for, or whoever else will be looking for, whether we would qualify under those state regulations and rules or not. So I think the to be determined thing is we would have to check against state regs versus what we already have currently in place and what might be needed.
Okay, so
we're working on a comprehensive plan that will address some of that as well. The comprehensive plan will be coming up in the next year or so. Hi, folks.
Okay, so that would coincide with our application for the loan then?
Yes, I would
Good.
think, yeah.
Oh, good, that's good.
Yeah, that is, the state funding revolving fund requires an application process, and it usually takes about 2 years to get through that process. And the Board of Selectmen meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago?
Yes, yeah, we talked.
The Clean Water Trust, who runs the state revolving fund, came down and gave explicit details as to what is needed and how the process works.
Oh, that's great.
You know, I would be dealing with them.
When you
Quick,
say 2 years, does that mean that it's going to be 2 years before we can start to do anything? Or can we start moving forward with the understanding that these monies are going to be
I think the engineering plan is gonna come first no matter what, so.
Yeah, the engineering plan and design was as I gathered from the covered by state revolving funds. So therefore, you know, if that's $3 million, we're on the hook for that. So
Okay.
that's what I gathered from that.
Yeah, that will take time also.
Yeah, what is the time frame for that? Did they give you any?
Well, what I gathered from the meeting from the selectmen was, you know, you gotta go through that, the state said you gotta go through that process, and then you have to take that plan, you have to apply for state revolving monies,
Right.
and that's, you know, so I think it was 2 years was
It was
what.
2 years by the time they got done with it, yeah.
Yeah,
So 2 years by the time we can start doing any kind of construction.
But during that time frame, you're gonna be doing the engineering and the architectural work and all that.
yeah, so it was a process, and I don't think it's a process that the Mashpee's ever gone through before.
No, and if you heard Falmouth yesterday, it's one of those things where you really have to be thorough in watching and
Tearing it apart. a
tearing
little
it
bit.
apart from what they're trying to construct, to make sure that you're dotting your i's and crossing your t's and making sure it's all squared away.
Mhm.
Hey, Don?
Hi.
We have Don joining us now, Finance Director.
Hi,
Hello.
Don.
Hi there.
Say hi, Don. You're on camera.
Got my hair done.
Welcome.
So,
Okay.
Rosa, can I just ask a quick question? This is Nancy Curran, and I just want to go back. I'm looking at my notes say that there was an increase in the last 4 years of $16 million on the cost estimate,
Yes.
which is $4 million a year. And you're saying that it's going to take another at least 2 years before we would get funding and plus the engineering. So there's going to be at least 2, maybe 3, 4 more years before this would go into action, which means the cost is going to go up.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I know that.
Okay.
We can only work off the numbers we have, though, that are current. That's the problem.
So if you project out for inflation of 3% a year, so the.
You had figured that out, I think, Don, what that, you had worked out a percentage difference, it seemed.
I think we had set up, it was about 3% based on the date of the last report and
Yes.
the 34 million where it had come up to. I think we had figured it out, it was about 3%. That was one thing that the gentleman from GHD did caution us about, is that these figures here are projections only, and they are most likely to change.
Mhm.
So,
And probably not to go down.
Probably not.
unfortunately, never.
And getting started will save us money.
We hope, yes.
Well,
I mean,
Yeah.
if the sooner now, because 3%, in 10 years, that's your.
Well,
Pretty soon you're talking real money, from 50 million to some real money.
That's right.
but you're also talking those phase 1 and 2, we don't have an idea, I mean, we don't even know how far out that is. So if you're looking at that, we've only put in 50 million for each one of those 3 phases. So if you project out 5 years at 3% a year,
Yeah.
and then go another 5 years and 3% a year,
Exactly.
that 150 million is long gone.
Mhm.
So-
Yeah.
And we don't know how much each phase phase 2 or phase 3 is gonna be.
Because each phase is different size, don't
Yes.
forget, too.
Yeah.
Right.
And for phase 1, I think is like the smallest phase.
Well, we
So
are
can I-
also hoping for multiple grants to help reduce that tax bill as well. So we'll see what happens.
So can I just, this is Mary, I thought I'd chime in. I mean, for me, the punchline is that phase 1 would cost, it's here at the bottom of that column, right? $140 per taxpayer per year.
For 30
I would-
years. Yeah.
I would say 152 up at the
Yep.
top.
Okay,
I would not anticipate any,
got it.
any.
But so at 150 and then, up to 450 for the entire plan, and with all the, provisos that, we don't really have solid information.
And that's for the capital, remember?
I would double.
Yep. Good, that's very helpful, thank you.
Thank you for putting together those projections, and we do realize they're just projections based on current rates, but that gives us something to think about and talk about. Can we go to the slide about some alternate funds? Okay, Andrew, this is where I wanted to tap your brain. Thank you for coming. I know that you have some experience with environmental funding, and was hoping that you could give us an idea of what some other towns have done. This is not an exhaustive list. It's not, there's many other funds out there, but these are some things that I was able to glean that some other communities have done. Some of these may not be available to us any longer, but wondered if you could give us some insights about some monies that might be good for our remediation and restoration projects.
Yeah, happy to. From our perspective, across the Cape over the last few years, we've seen a lot of kind of creative uses of funding that has come through either the EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, or NOAA to do coastal habitat restoration projects. So, when we talk about what we're trying to do writ large with water issues, it's to restore, normal water quality to a lot of the estuaries and embayments, throughout the Cape that are impaired. That's the fundamental question that, the Environmental Defense Fund, or CLF, is asking folks to kind of stay on the stick with. So, like if we look at the Muddy Creek project out in Orleans and Chatham, they were able to secure almost $7 million in habitat restoration grants. When they did that project, it prevented the need for sewering, almost 300 homes that were along the estuary there. That is now not impaired any longer as an estuary compared to where it was before. I'm not exactly familiar how that could fit into some of the estuaries in Mashpee. I'm sure the folks from the town would have a good idea about that. The new money that's coming in through WIFIA, for really, really large projects, we're probably going to have to be looking at some of that money coming up, and again, as we look through the partnerships with the Conservation Commission and the USDA, NRCS through Public Act 536 funding, they've been very successful in doing, basically marshland cleanup process, river cleanup process that, reduces the need for, kind of the regular brick and mortar sort of sewering funding. But, as the town, I think, laid out in Mashpee, that's, as in most of the other towns on the Cape, that's going to have to be the primary way of going about that. So as we look at that, that federal matching fund that used to be available, really isn't anymore. And, it is a problem as we look at nationally aging city infrastructure as well as rural wastewater infrastructure, and kind of dealing with the increasingly difficult strictures that the EPA is putting out. There are a number of bills in Congress right now especially in the House. We're on almost all of them, like the Pipe Act, in the other ones, like the Living Shorelines Act, which would also help with coastal restoration. Where those bills are going to go, I can't say, but I think as we're all looking towards doing some sort of an infrastructure package, and the president seems willing to work on that. I don't know if it's going to happen this year. I doubt it. But there was a letter that Congressman Keating joined with I think it was 74 of his colleagues, asking that wastewater be a central part of any infrastructure package when that gets developed on the Hill. Because there is, I think, a growing consensus nationwide that we have the resources that are available to municipalities like Mashpee and I think others on the Cape are really insufficient to meet the need that's going to be coming up over the next 50 years. And, the federal government has a role to play in helping to finance that stuff. On a specific level, I'd be more than happy to sit down with folks from the town and talk about any projects that you're looking at in terms of, marshland restoration, estuarine restoration, any of that stuff. I'd be more than happy to work on trying to get together grants for you guys. And, Congressman would obviously also be very supportive in any way of trying to go after federal or state funding that would help you guys to deal with the problem.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That sounds great. Thanks, Andrew. Well, I think that we have about 20 minutes left. I was wondering if we have some questions from any of the people who are listening for either the finance team or for Andrew.
I have a question.
Okay, Glenn, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I was listening to the discussion about taxes per person, which I understand that this requires new funds. Maybe it's a little bit more of a comment or a question to see what people think. But, I understand that it's new funds and that we have to raise new money to pay for this. But I don't know if that's the right way to talk about it. It's not like we are going to build something new, but this is an existing problem. We're kind of funding the past. We're cleaning up something that has happened over the last few decades. So maybe as we talk about it, a better way to approach it is that we're funding something that we should have funded a long time ago and we're catching up, as opposed to asking for something new. I don't know how people feel about that, but if you understand what I mean.
I think everybody understands what you mean, but the situation is that we have these polluted waters that need to be cleaned up. And yes, we need to do both. We need to stop the source, stop future contributions to that, but we have to clean up, as you said, the past problem. And that's just the reality of where we are.
Right, that's what I mean. But what I mean is that it's not like we're going to go out and say we need to build a new library or build a new school because we don't have one. Yeah, we need to build new sewer treatment because we don't have one. But it's something that we should have had and needed to have. So I just hope this doesn't end up being discussed as, well, this is something we could do or couldn't do. I think it really needs to be discussed. This is something we really have to do and probably should have been putting money aside or reserving money or recognizing an existing liability as the build out that put the nitrogen in the ground was done. So, and I guess what I'm trying to say in a lot of ways, this is a catch up.
I think everyone's in agreement with you and that people recognize that we do have to do this, and the sooner the better.
So we're catching up.
I'll pick up on that and just kind of with a little bit different angle on it. That when I look at these numbers, I'm a little surprised. I realize it was going to be this small per taxpayer per year, which, you know, I mean, it's a significant amount, but it's not, when you compare, it's not as significant as when you think about what are the risks to us as taxpayers of not doing this, and the economic harm to the town's economy, but then the economic harm to the value of our real estate if this problem goes unaddressed. It's certainly going to be more than a few $100s. It would be thousands of dollars in real estate value that we all run the risk of losing if Mashpee becomes a less attractive place, and you know, we have a known environmental problem. And I don't know whether, you know, just for the town folks in the town, whether that's something that you can ever get into, is kind of looking at the downside, or what are the risks that that we face by not doing this. Is that ever something in your purview that you get involved with?
That's a question for the finance team.
No, we have not looked at it from that angle. I did want to make a comment. I don't know if anybody was either at the meeting or watched the selectmen's meeting last night, which was very interesting because they had an individual, a gentleman from Falmouth and a gentleman from Chatham, both discussing their individual towns and how they've begun or have been handling their wastewater issues. And one thing that I took away from that meeting more than probably anything is educating the public and getting the public on board. I think this is going to I think we all have to admit this is not going to be cheap, and they said that last night. Everybody agrees we all want clean water. I live here, I have a child, my family lives here, I want clean water. It is not going to be cheap. We all know that. But the more you can educate people, the more you're going to get them on board, and they're going to get more people on board. And I took that away from that meeting. So I think needs to be a lot of public outreach beyond us. I mean, we can put out the numbers are the numbers. You know, we can't you know, fake the numbers, that they are what they are. But you can educate people as far as, like you said, what this is going to do, catching up with the past, and that kind of you know, that kind of discussion needs to be brought forward. And to be honest with you, I've worked for the town for 23 years, and just now, in the last few years, has this really come to the forefront. So I think it's really something that needs to, if you're going to try to move forward, you have to be honest with the people. We have been saying that as a finance team from the get-go, is you have to be honest with the people what this is going to cost them. But as in other towns, when you educate them, they will accept the fact that, yes, it's going to cost us money, but the long-term return is going to be worth it, worth the investment.
Yeah. Just to jump in and maybe make it more succinct, I really don't think we should frame this as a tax increase. I mean, even though it's going to cost more money, it shouldn't be headlined. It should be headlined as a water cleanup, as a benefit for the town, as something that's going to increase revenues as it increases property values and make it more attractive and continue to bring economic development. If it's headlined as it's just going to cost you more money, it's going to be very difficult to get support.
And we're not saying that that's not, you don't headline it with the amount of the cost, but you are honest with people so that when they are taking that leap into it, it's a leap of faith. We've been honest with you, but you will have a positive return in the end.
The other one, I'm sorry, Glenn, go ahead if you wanted to speak.
No, I just said thank you.
You're welcome.
You guys are on video, so if you scroll up on your screen, whoever is sharing the screen so you can see them.
Mary, one of the other things, if you can scroll to the taxpayer information sheet. So you mentioned about the cost. That's just the cost for infrastructure. So you've also got the cost of a department. And sitting at the selectmen's meeting last night, Falmouth had a department of $1.5 million. Mashpee, Chatham had a department of $1 million. So that's another, and I don't mean to frame, but that's another additional cost on top of the structure. And as well as, you know, okay, you build the septic system, you've got to have people hook up. You know, and that's going to cost those taxpayers money out of their pocket directly to hook up to the sewer system. So we want them to know when they're voting what this is going to, you know, okay, yes, we all want clean water. It's going to cost something, and that, you know, that estimated cost per household to hook up, we've heard, you know, $10,000, we've heard $15,000, we've heard $20,000 per household.
But can I ask? There was an article in the Enterprise a week or so ago saying that the Sewer Commission had approved a plan that where the cost for hookup was shared equally by all the taxpayers, and it wasn't just for the few houses, you know, the portion of.
That was an idea. I don't think it was firm.
I see. Okay. Could you walk us through this tables? Because I can't, and I apologize to people, it's a little small. We'll try to enhance it. We kind of, it's, yeah.
These are close to what we had presented in August to the selectmen. The only difference is the monetary amount. When we presented in August, the selectmen had told us $88 million to run our analysis on $88 million for phase 1, 2, and 3. And so I've changed phase 1 to 51.2 to match what I received from GHD and the sewer system, or sewer commission received from GHD. And then, I mean, this is like, how do I say this? There are so many assumptions in this table that once one thing moves, everything moves. You know, I put it at 0% forgiveness, 5% forgiveness, 12% forgiveness, 25% forgiveness. Here's what it would cost the average taxpayer for each one in scenario 1. Here's what phase 2 would cost. Here's what phase 3 would cost. Here's what the total, you know, you go straight across, here's what the total debt cost would be for all 3 phases. And then what the total debt cost would be over 40 years. And then what we think the rooms tax, based on rooms tax offset, would be if, you know, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce estimate comes to fruition. Again, we don't know if that's going to happen. And then you can see column A minus column B gives you what it would be after the cost, after the offset, and then the total cost for 40 years with an offset. And then the next column is the WIF. They had talked about the WIF being at 3%. You know, right now, if you put it at 3%, it'd be $131 for the average taxpayer. The WIF would be different than debt payments. A WIF is taken.
Sorry, could you say what a WIF is, please?
Your WIF is wastewater infrastructure fund. It runs very much like the CPA fund. It's a surcharge right on top of your tax bill. And the CPA is 3% of your tax. So the WIF would be whatever the selectmen decide to do, if they want to do 1%, 2%, or 3%. And
Sandwich did it for 2.
Yes, Sandwich did it for 2%.
Passed it last town meeting.
And so you get, and it's used for running wastewater. You know, you could use that to support your debt. You could use that to run your department. So that's, but it's used for wastewater, however you choose to use it. And of course, that would go up as well as your values go up and your tax bills go up, just like the CPA. And so, I mean, I put a note on the bottom of the WIF starts at $131 per year. Over 40 years, it would be, in the final year, it'd be $486 per tax bill, just based on a 2%, 2.5% increase. And I had, the backup to this taxpayer information sheet is probably about 20 to 30 spreadsheets in a workbook. I figured we didn't need to see all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So this 131 a year for the width is on top of the 152 a year.
Not necessarily. It depends on what is chosen. I mean, like the CPA fund, you're paying 3% on top of your bill for a CPA. There's purchases that the CPA makes for the land, open space, that type of issues. The CPA doesn't go out to bond or sometimes to make those purchases because they've already got the funds in the bank. Sandwich is doing this. Sandwich is putting in the WIF, and I've spoken to the Sandwich tax collector, and I used to work in about 7 or 8 years ago. They're the first town that's doing this, putting the WIF in for the state. And listening to the town manager from Sandwich and his presentation to the Board of Selectmen, he felt that it was better to put a 2% on a tax bill than ask for a
Debt exclusion. Yeah.
That was his philosophy. He thought it would be a better way to raise the money.
But he also reduced the CPC.
Right, he reduced the CPA from 3% to 2%.
So they actually saw just an increase of 1% in overall in their tax.
And I think this comes back to Mary's, if I'm not mistaken, Mary Adams' comment, or maybe it was Rosa, I'm not sure which one, that every town is tracking this differently. And what works in one town doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in another town.
I think it just occurs to me that if you appeal to the fiscal responsibility of people responsible, so you say to them, we're putting in this WIF to save the money so that we can spend it rather than borrow, and
Exactly.
that will appeal to people. I
think I just need to make one comment here. Jason Strebel, Director of Assessing. Are a lot of policy decisions that have yet to be made, and every one of those policy decisions is going to affect what the taxpayers have to spend individually. If there are betterments, that goes to the individual who's being bettered, maybe not town-wide. If there's a WIF, that's one thing. If they choose to hook up to how much water usage you have, or if they do a flat rate for sewage usage, if there is a mandatory hookup or not, if you get to wait until your current septic system fails before you have to hook up. There's so many different policy decisions that are going to affect the money flow up front and what it's going to cost individual taxpayer up front that it's really hard to give a concrete answer to what is it going to cost the taxpayer right away.
So can I go on that comment? This is Nancy Curran again. What a number of you have said over and over again is we want clean water, but I think it's bigger than that. We want clean water with increasing property value and increases in jobs, businesses that bring value and income to our community. And this is the headline of our paper here in Key West this morning, that we have been now listed on a place not to go because of the reef damage that's happening. And we rely on tourism, as does Mashpee, for its summer population. And then I looked at, really quickly, I looked at the $152 per year for 30 years. That's roughly about $5,000 plus a hookup, and I went with the high cost of $20,000. That's $25,000. And if you go on the high end, it's $33,500 without the yearly added expense of the lift costs. That could be wiped out in another 10 years of property value decreases because of water quality decreasing. And I think that's something to sort of educate people on, is yes, it might seem like a lot of money, 25,000, but if you wanted to sell your house in 5 years and your property value just dropped $50,000, aren't you going to wish you had invested and improved the property value because of?
Well, I agree to a certain point. There is certainly value imputed in a person's property based on what you're buying into as far as the community and its resources. But there is also a danger of pricing houses to where the cost would be beneficial if a buyer was going to move to another town to buy in, because if they buy in Mashpee, it's going to cost them $20,000, $30,000 more because of the way the sewer was implemented, versus they can go the next town over, which is doing things differently. That could actually drive property values down, which doesn't help our overall situation. So it is a balance between making the community attractive without harming the housing market by placing too many burdens on individual properties and or neighborhoods.
I don't agree, but that's okay.
I want to just jump in. Ashley Fisher wrote in the chat about 1991 KV Associates report that was titled Cumulative Impact Assessment Plan to Reduce and Control Sources of Contamination in the Mashpee and Santuit Shoestring Bay River Estuaries. These consultants always pick long titles. But anyway, she said in 1991, there was a recommended sewer system installed back then. And was that ever put to the, her question is, was there ever a full financial assessment of it?
Where?
Of this sewer proposal back in 1991. I don't know if anybody was there back then.
Had to do with maybe the neighborhood of New Seabury, which does have their own sewer treatment plants and some the hookups in that neighborhood, or possibly for Willow Bend, which was being built around that time. They were doing their own sewerage within that neighborhood. It's a very large neighborhood. So maybe it's referring to one of those two neighborhoods that was working on at the time. I'm not familiar with anything else beyond that area.
Okay, thanks. And Ashley couldn't hear her talk, so we can follow up on that later too, Ashley.
Well, the only other thing you have is in 2014, the Board of Selectmen at that time were in negotiations and had almost a complete, actually it was complete, all it needed was a town meeting vote, I think, to go to a sewer district, tying the water district and sewer district together. So that's the closest we've come to actually getting the sewer system up and running in town.
And we were literally away.
One more question, please.
But can I wait, Glenn? Could you just let Dawn finish? What were you going to say, Dawn?
No, I was just saying we were literally one vote away. If we had voted in favor at that town meeting, we would probably, we're guessing,
have shovels
in the ground at this point.
It didn't happen. Glenn, you had a question?
Yeah, the finance crew, so we'll use some finance words and maybe draw it back to a much bigger picture. Does the town consider that treating the wastewater to the standards that it's required to, its responsibility, or in finance language, its liability? Or is that something that's not a liability?
I think that's more a political question than it is for a finance team. They're here for the numbers, really. I think we all of us live in Mashpee and are very concerned and want the waters to be clean and want to work on that very hard. And that's why they're putting together numbers that are worst case scenario, basically, and to make sure that the public knows what this will cost. Not to scare them off, but to make sure that when the tax bill comes out, they're not shocked by the cost. They know and have gotten an honest response from us on what that cost will be. So many times you can take it, massage the numbers to look whatever you want, but we can only go by what we have for information in front of us today. And if that changes to the better, I'm great with that. You don't want to end up like the big dig and have, you know, these numbers all of a sudden were in billions of dollars and they had no clue it was coming.
I agree with you 100%. I think you have to be perfectly transparent, perfectly honest. You have to plan for the worst. You have to hope for the best. But I think my point, maybe it's a political comment, is
Glenn,
that
if I interrupt just a bit, Glenn. The thing for me is the way it's set up now. In the worst case scenario, I'm all for this. Let's go ahead and get it done. But you know, I'm one person. I just want to make sure everybody knows that, Glenn. It's not to.
I totally agree with you. I'm 100% in agreement with you. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I think what I'm saying is that, you know, we're required to have police. We're required to have streets. We're required to provide schools. I think we're required to treat the wastewater as well as part of the responsibility. And I know that we all support that. So I look forward to moving ahead and helping however possible to get this thing done, and appreciate everything that people do. And I get you. You have to be totally honest with what it's going to cost. You can't hide it.
And one thing that I would like to throw out once again to the finance team is a request for a grant writer to address the environmental needs. I think we have to have somebody whose job it is to actually be targeting remediation of our waterways. It is 8 o'clock, and I guess I need to just thank everyone for their participation. This has been a great discussion, and I think it's going to be ongoing for a good while. Our next presentation, December 3rd, is going to be a little bit of information about 7 towns on the Cape that we have been looking at that have had a lot of success in moving forward on their wastewater treatment program. So I hope everybody will be able to tune into that.
Thanks to the town and to Andrew Nelson from Keating's office for joining. We really appreciate all your contributions.
Thank you so very much.